Well, thanks so much for coming. My name is Julia Felton, and this is Aditi Vijay.
Hi.
And we run the Masters in Clinical Psychological Science program here at the University of Maryland in the Psych department. And I think I actually know a fair amount of people here, which is nice. And many people have actually had their hands in this project at some point or another, so I very much appreciate everybody's work on it. But Lauren asked us here today to talk a little bit about Adobe Connect, which is the primary way that we interact with our students. And so we thought that we would sort of reflect back to you guys on our experiences with the program, some things that we've learned, some pluses and minuses, and some sort of best practices and tips that we've sort of picked up along the way that we thought we would share with you. We were hoping this would be very informal, even though I brought my laser pointer. But please feel free if you have any questions or thoughts, or if you, I mean, many people in here probably know these programs even better than we do. So if you have any kind of suggestions for us, we're always very willing to hear them. So we thought we'd start off with a little bit about our program. The Psych department wanted to develop a standalone master's program that would enable us both to kind of train students in the psychological science method and also to partner with the Office of Extended Studies, which would allow us to create a program where the psychology department would benefit from the students that we brought in. And so that was sort of where the idea was born. And in order to do that, OES recommends that you award something called an MPS, which several departments have taken advantage of, including economics, geographical sciences, et cetera. And what we needed for our program, because it's called a Master's in Professional Studies, the vast majority of our students were going to be professionals. So a lot of our students have full-time jobs. A lot of our students, work and have lives and are married and have families and all of these sorts of things. So we really needed a platform that was going to be flexible and meet the needs of our students. And what we realized was that we could get sort of the most bang for our buck if we did it online and open it up to really kind of anyone that was interested across, the United States and beyond. We opted to use this online format to meet all of those various needs. Mention that. Faculty needs. This has been sort of a blessing for us because both Aditi and I attend scientific conferences, we have families, we occasionally go on vacation, we do lots of different things. And we found that when you teach in a more traditional format, so often you have to cancel class, you have to find a guest lecturer, you have to sort of find ways to fill in the gaps when you're gone. And what we found is that Adobe Connect is so flexible, you can actually even do it from your phone. If you get stuck in the airport, et cetera, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But it's possible. And I've done it from, I've done it from conference hotels.
I was able to communicate with students from India in December. I was working on a research project there. Somebody had an issue and we could just jump on Adobe Connect. I could see them, they could see me. It felt like we were very, very close.
Yeah. Which is really neat because often, and the other thing is that you can then also bring in lecturers from all around the world that you wouldn't necessarily be able to include. So, so Aditi has leveraged a lot of her contacts in Nevada.
Yeah, we've actually been able to have guest speakers from California, Washington. They come in during our class time. They look exactly the same way that I do. They just come up on their webcam. And that's actually been, I think, out of the student feedback, one of the most positive experiences, where if we had been in a classroom, I'm not sure I would have been able to master that technology to bring somebody in and have it feel like the same experience. We taught a class over the summer where we had, it was an in-person class, and we wanted to get a guest speaker, so we did it via Skype, and it just wasn't the same. Just like her face was really small. Some of these things that are a little bit more difficult to quantify, it just didn't feel like the person was in the room in quite the same way as it does when we're all on Adobe Connect. So that's been a nice benefit of using this platform.
Absolutely. And then I'm sure everybody here knows the difference between blended and flipped and all the various advantages and disadvantages and overlaps, et cetera, of these. We ended up going with a blended format because we thought that, you know, it would, or actually we're moving towards, I should say, a blended format because we think that it'll meet our needs for both getting across the material that we're interested in and also providing an avenue for more interaction, face-to-face sort of thing.
What does flipped mean? I'm not familiar with that.
So flipped is when you put the lectures, correct me if I'm wrong, flipped is when you put the lectures online and you do the interaction in a more synchronous manner. So like you do so we do a lot, in psychology we do a lot of like therapy role plays and things like that. So you spend the class time doing the therapy role plays and you spend the asynchronous lecture time doing this is what, you know, validity is, this is what a correlation coefficient is, et cetera. And blended is more kind of, you move some online, it's more kind of like a combination. Is that a fair definition of the two?
But so this is kind of what our screen looks like. So when students log in to the course, this is what they see. So this is the way Julia sets up her class with the PowerPoint slides in the middle. Here you can see her name and that she's kind of the host of the lecture. And so she's also the one that has the ability to give people rights, like to use their microphone, to use their webcam. She's the one that can move the slides, that sort of thing. And then if we had other people signed in when we took this screenshot, you would see a list of all the participant names here. So you're able to see exactly who is in the course. And it's one of these kind of neat things is that most people will sign in here with their ID. But if you want a guest to come in or you want somebody else who's not affiliated with the school, you just give them the website and they can just sign in as a guest. They type their name in and it's just very, very simple. Up at the top right there, you can see where it says Start My Webcam. For anybody whose webcam is on, that's where you'll see their face. And all of these little pods are adjustable, so you can change the size of them and where on the screen they're positioned. And then there's that left column there, which is the chat screen. So it's kind of just like a text message bar, and people will put in their comments during class. They'll put up questions. Sometimes the one that, I mean, it's really great because one of the things that is important to do while you're on this platform is to be very careful about the sounds that are coming into your microphone. And oftentimes we'll get feedback or somebody will accidentally unmute theirs and it can be a very loud, unpleasant sound. So, you know, it's a nice place there for people to be able to put in comments like that so you get that feedback without necessarily interrupting the flow of the lecture. So this is just a different way in which you can set up the screen. And we like to change it around depending on what the task is or depending on what it is that we're trying to get across. For example, I find the chat really distracting. Like people sometimes will ask a question and we're already 3 slides past that. And so my preference is for people to raise their hand and then they can come on their microphone and ask the question. So I make my chat bar very small. But sometimes if we're doing more collaborative work and I want them to be able to have that, you know, I would change around the layout of the screen.
And this screen is good too because you can see, you can get a much bigger face, you can have more people on and you can see everyone. There's just no PowerPoint up there. And then,
oh, can you go back for a second?
Yeah.
So one of the other really cool things about this is that you can put stuff out there like polls. So if in a regular traditional format you want to ask people to raise their hand, like how many people think, I don't know, this person made a good point, raise your hand, yes or no. You can just put this poll out there and each student can mark yes or no and the bars will shift as they put in their responses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you can either, like with the clickers, you know, you sort of have to have them ready to go before class. You can make polls on the spot too, which is really nice too.
Yeah.
And you don't need to pay for the device. Exactly. Absolutely. And then you can also, this is the whiteboard feature.
Nice.
Yeah, I tried to. So I frankly don't use this feature a lot because this is my attempt at writing, and I'm not very good at it. But you can, there are times when somebody needs like a little bit more explanation about a concept or something like that, and you have the whiteboard, and you can type too, and draw little boxes and stuff.
So do you just use a regular mouse to try to use the whiteboard, or is there a special pen tool?
Oh, I don't know.
No, well, when I do it, you just click on the top there. You can see, yes, thank you. So you can click there to get your pen, and then you just use your mouse to write in whatever it is that you want to. And I actually use this quite a bit for when I want to do stuff with graphs. Like a lot of times we just want to make a really quick XY to demonstrate something, and this has been a really great tool to do that.
And then the final thing that I don't have a picture of is that you can actually flip it so that the students see your laptop or desktop screen. And this is really helpful if you want to, let's say, show a video on YouTube or something. You can have it all keyed up on your screen and everybody watches it together. Or if you want to, oftentimes in the beginning of a term, we'll walk through our ELMS page. We'll show people where the syllabus is, where you click on certain things. And so I'll just do that all on my laptop. They'll still see my face, they'll still see, but they'll see my screen. And so, yeah. Those are the main sort of features. And then this is our another thing we do.
So one of the things that we do is we record all of our classes because we are this professional studies program, and we're not allowed to require attendance. So what we do is we just record it, and this is where it's all stored. After class, you just have to go and unclick this to make it public, and then we're able to post a link to the video recording on the ELMS page. So we, for example, had a student who wasn't able to finish the semester and took it incomplete, and it was just so, like, it was such a huge benefit. It's so easy to just provide her with these lectures, and she's going to be able to make everything up. It's actually been the easiest way I've ever been able to help somebody make up almost an entire semester. It's kind of nice to have.
Yeah. Oh, and that's just a picture of how we link to it on our ELMS. And this is a picture of what it looks like. So if they were to click on their ELMS page, that link, it would actually pop up in the ELMS screen itself, and they can watch it. So that's a picture of one of my classes recording. So that's really nice too, because it works really seamlessly with ELMS, so that you can kind of have a one-stop shop for them to go. So here are some of kind of the pros of Adobe Connect. No snow days. I mean, just this past term, how many days did we lose to snow? And it was so frustrating. Aditi and I didn't lose any. We were able to teach from our houses, which maybe the students didn't like as much, but we didn't have to worry about, things having to reshuffle our schedule, having things not be able to be due or anything like that. And that was a huge benefit. Yeah. If we get sick, Aditi lives in Baltimore, if there's a major accident or something, she doesn't have to come down. She can do it all from her house, all that good stuff.
So the breakout rooms is, I think, both a pro and a challenge of Adobe Connect. One of the things that we were really interested in designing in our courses was a place for students to interact with each other, and we were really trying to find a way not to lose the group work component. And we initially did struggle with this. We would put students into the breakout rooms, and I don't know what would happen, but sometimes the screen would blink. Students were moved randomly into, they were sort of picked up from one room and just dropped into the other. And we could kind of see it happening, but we couldn't stop it. And so I'd say the first semester, in my class, I teach the whole class at one time, and it's a total of 21 students, or 24 actually the first term. And I think almost everybody was running on a wireless network, and that was actually turned out to be a really big issue. Julia's class is done in 2 sections, and I think group work has been more successful there.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think Aditi is absolutely right. Lauren and I went a lot back and forth. I think that's a lot. That I think it is a bandwidth issue, and the problem is not the Maryland system; it's your student systems, because they're too doing it from their houses. And we had a kid that was trying to do it from like a Borders bookstore or something like that, and it just the wireless isn't that good. And to have everybody have their webcam on takes a lot of bandwidth. And so they were, not to point fingers, but I think that it was a lot of most of the problems were students' wireless connections, to be honest. When you do have smaller groups though, and when I have a class of like 7, the breakout rooms work much better. You can put them in little rooms, they can all turn on their webcams, they can do a group project together, and then they can come back and present it. So it really more mirrors an actual classroom.
And when it works, it's really cool. Like you as the instructor can drop into each of these groups and see what they're doing and then pop out. There are ways to send messages out to the whole group so you can give them time warnings that way. And when it doesn't work, it looks like a horror show.
But I imagine that, as newer versions of Adobe Connect come out too, that this is only going to get better and better. So you put
this was mine. So one of the things that is really nice about Adobe Connect is that you have a lot of different ways to get information from students. One of the things that we've been working on refining is that we have a group of students that are very comfortable turning on their webcam, turning on their microphone and speaking, and then we have other students that want to type into the text box the entire semester. And we're kind of in negotiations with students about like what a reasonable amount of participation looks like. But I think that it's been nice because there are some students that I think in a traditional class I probably never would have heard from and might not have had much idea kind of what they were thinking, where here I do get a sense of that.
Yeah. And whereas therapist Julia wants to like expose them to the anxiety of talking out loud, I realize that they're also students, and I'm a teacher, and getting even from some students, even just getting them to chat in the chat box, they wouldn't in a traditional classroom, and it's nice to give some opportunity for them to be able to participate, like Aditi said. So some cons. So this is sort of the flip side of the text box. When I teach and when I've taught in more traditional classrooms, I tend to do the thing where I will stare somebody down until they ask a question or until they answer the question, and I can catch eyes and I can more directly ask people, and there's more social pressure to which I capitalize on, to make students participate and to make sure that students are looking at you and understanding the flow of the conversation. When you see, in a traditional classroom, sometimes students look confused, and that's enough for you to realize, oh, I've got to slow down, I've got to go over this point again. And you lose that a little bit, or you lose that totally. And so you're kind of more relying on other tricks of the trade to get students to participate.
We don't always know what's going on the other side of the computer. We do try to call on people randomly. In every evaluation we give, we ask them how much time they leave their computer during class, and it's amazing. We have 100% attendance 100% of the time. So we don't really know exactly where people are, what they're doing. I will say though, every time I've called on somebody randomly, because I'm not sure they've answered, so we think that they're at least there and they're listening. But I think one of the things that I've struggled with is that I can't see them, so I don't know kind of what's getting across and what I have to follow up with.
So you were saying before how you recorded your lectures and it has helped that person who had an incomplete. But did you post those almost immediately afterwards? Like if a student even, maybe they had, to leave the lecture or they just needed to see it again?
Yep, well, I post it right away actually. Okay. Part of our closing down of class is I stop the recording and they remind me multiple times to post. And so within minutes of class ending, it's up there and it's part of the materials that they have access to.
So even if they weren't paying attention live?
They can go back, yeah.
We actually, so I think that students stay fairly engaged. And it's so akin to a live room that I think we have pretty good luck with that.
Yeah.
You do build in breaks, I assume, in a 3-hour class, right?
We try. Sometimes I forget.
So excited.
Yeah,
Ah.
I think it's interesting what we're talking about. So I mean, like, part of our learning curve was I kind of had assumed at first, oh, it's not that big of a deal if they need to use the restroom or whatever, they can just go and do that. And I think my first set of evaluations, they said, can you please talk slower and can you give us some breaks? So we try to do that. We try to, like, at the top of the Adobe Connect, there are options to say talk louder, talk slower. We never get anybody using those, but we have been trying to get more of that feedback while the talk is going on.
We also have, being psychologists, we like evaluate them like every other month. They're like filling out forms about what they like, what they don't like. So I think in that way, and if anyone does end up trying to use this, I would actually highly recommend that you do, at least for your first few classes, have lots of periods for evaluation, because things that we weren't aware of were kind of a problem, like how annoying the breakout rooms were to the students.
Yeah, and I think that the issue of like volume and like cadence of speech were a much bigger issue than I had anticipated. And after the first evaluation where we asked them for it, you know, a couple of people mentioned it. And then I got a lot of people emailing me saying, I don't know if you realize, but you speak really fast. And with which I'm probably doing right now, but I'm working on it. And so that kind of combined with the microphone and sometimes with the feedback, I think that it made it really hard for people to hear and to understand.
That's funny, because I think I must talk considerably louder than you, because I had people telling me to turn the volume down. So but there are ways, I mean, to handle this, like getting a microphone. Just having a microphone makes a huge world of difference in terms of sound and stuff like that. But I actually don't even use a microphone, and I haven't had students mention anything. But I do think I speak quite loudly. So. Another con, sort of as we said before, there are none of these like nonverbal cues to understand that you get with a face-to-face interaction. And I think the way to handle this is you empower your students up front to say, look, I'm not going to know if you're confused. And especially with a master's program, as a professional student, we ask that you do please tell us this, and we evaluate them constantly, and et cetera. So some challenges.
I guess from an instructional perspective, trying to create opportunities for students to actually interact with each other in a way that kind of facilitates a deeper understanding of the material has actually been challenging. One of the things that we'll be changing, or at least I'll be changing going forward because I have the larger class together, is to tell people that they need to plug into a hardwire connection. I think that makes a big difference for them supporting the platform, which I hadn't quite realized fully before. And I'm hoping that kind of that change will allow for them to be in breakout rooms for a longer period of time, to be able to spend some time actually engaging in discussion with each other. What I had been having happen was that by the time they finally got settled into the room was when time was kind of up for that activity, and they'd come back to the class and they hadn't had a chance to talk very much about that.
You also, there are tools that Adobe Connect has that can be very helpful with this. So the text box, like we said, is very kind of gets people involved. You can use polls, and that really helps a lot of people too. And some people are sort of more effective at polling than others. And then the wonderful thing is too, even if they are a little bit nervous to turn on their webcams, they can just use the audio. So like any good teacher,
reduce the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely, and it does seem to help, and we don't lose them as often. I try and have at least one time per class where a student's presenting something, or a student is in charge of talking about a piece of material or homework assignment that they did. You just have to think ahead a little bit more than you could do it on the fly in a typical classroom.
I did actually this day remember to give them a break, and somebody forgot to mute their microphone, and so what we have recorded is like, I stopped the recording, but it was a fight with her husband. Oh, no. So sometimes you hear things that you don't really mean to hear.
She meant want that to be brought forward as
edit that out, I don't think.
No, not of Adobe.
Not of this. No.
You can cut that part off.
Oh.
So when you go to edit, when you go to archive, when you log into Adobe Central, when you click the recordings, and then there's an edit button. Once you cut any portion you don't want.
That's good.
Another tip you may want to think about, you can enable lecture mode, which means by default you just disable their mic so you don't hear feedback.
Oh, except that I think that I had spoken to somebody who gave me that suggestion, but we do so much during the lecture where they're talking and they're in, that was why it didn't work for us for this format. And I think over time, like they've kind of just learned, and it doesn't happen very often now. And they private message each other, I think, saying please be quiet and that sort of thing. Sometimes it's better to let the class take care of it.
Everybody's on headphones too, right? Like that's another thing that I ask my students to do is make sure you're plugged in. With just your iPhone, like your earbuds, because then we will hear your background noise. Yeah. So that makes a huge difference too.
We have that as a best practice and something that they're required to do.
Okay,
and then,
so
after a point, I just couldn't keep reminding them anymore.
I think it's good to remember that, especially our master's students who are kind of like less traditional students, oftentimes several, are coming back after a long period of time. They don't remember, this is like a new learning experience for them as well. So I think that just any time you start a new class like this, it's just gonna take a little while for the students to kind of understand. I don't know if that's been your experience teaching undergrads, or maybe the undergrads are a little bit more, yeah, they're good. Yeah, we have a lot of students that are coming back after, 20 years out of school, and it's a different experience.
We had one student who's absolutely lovely, but the first day of class was like freaking out because she couldn't find the web meeting. And I was teaching, and so finally I was like, well, talk to Julia. And she's like, I'm typing it in and it's not coming up, and I just didn't know what to do. Well, come to find out, she was typing it into the Google bar instead of like where you put the website.
Yeah.
And so we have had some people who are closer to that end of the spectrum that things that you would never think you would have to say, you actually do.
She still has not been able to upload a Word doc to Elms yet.
I
Every
know.
time she has a homework assignment, she has to separately email it to us because she doesn't know how to attach things.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, a unique, although not all that unique to these, if your departments are looking at master's programs, and especially these MPS programs, that there are multiple hurdles to, there's the learning and then there's the technology. So this is another challenge, I think, with using Adobe Connect, is that it's really wonderful for lectures, a little less good for breakout rooms, and then any kind of other unusual experience that you could possibly think of, it's a little bit more challenging.
I teach a diversity class that in person is very experiential. There's no book, it's a lot of discussion, and that class is coming up in June, and we have not quite figured out how we're going to translate that to an online platform, because like for example, we usually do an activity where people have index cards that they lay out, and I can tell them to prep that ahead of time, but if they kind of don't go through that experience, the rest of the class can go off the rails, and so we're still figuring that part out.
Now, when you're going to these fully online courses, you're not fully online synchronously the entire time, are you? Or is that the goal to
Well,
be absolute? Because there are things you could do not synchronously, taking some of that time, so you're not together 3 hours in this confined space, where that kind of engagement and activity might be easier to put together than if you're trying to get them to do it in this space where you have to be there. Maybe you don't have to be present in that part of their activity.
I think we're still kind of figuring that out. In theory, we do 3 hours of face-to-face synchronous lecture, and then they have 6 hours of asynchronous activities where they do readings and whatever other activities that we engage in. So some of that happens there. Yeah. Part of what I was finding first semester was that I had prepped a lot of the asynchronous lectures ahead of time. So for each lecture that I gave, there were maybe 3 15 to 20-minute videos about course material that they needed. And the idea was that they would watch that ahead of time and then come to the lecture and we would talk about it. And it turned out that a lot of people weren't watching them. So I think that's just a more general teaching issue, not unique to Adobe Connect. But
I also found with some of that some material lends itself better to asynchronous videos than other material. So when I taught my research methods class, where it was a lot of this is what validity is, that's great for asynchronous. But then when you want to talk about like childhood depression, it like requires, and maybe I just haven't been thinking enough about this. I think like certain kind of aspects are better in the asynchronous format and some are better just more synchronously. So we're always kind of battling with how to balance that, and it's a really important point because I think, and Aditi then did like one 3-hour asynchronous lecture, a couple when she was gone, and I think they really were not fans of that as much just because it's like,
what blended learning or online learning is, and it is not 3 hours of lecture and 6 hours of homework. It is different kinds of student engagement, and I think we know who those people are, and I think we need to go and educate them a little bit. Because the paradigm has changed so much from that.
And we're probably not, we're just focused on the synchronous, so we're telling you mostly about that, but I think we're probably also not kind of conveying to you that the variety of stuff we do also. So like they get together as groups and work on grants. We do have lots of other varieties, just for the portion of this we've been focusing on. But the students actually really enjoy the Adobe Connect videos. We get very high teacher ratings. Ours actually far surpass our actual doctoral level program and undergrad. We're way above, and we figured this out statistically, so it's got to be true. We're way above actually, even like the typical. So we really actually would promote this Adobe Connect. If you're going to do distance learning in any sort of fashion, I would say Adobe Connect should absolutely be part of it. Another thing that I think I wanted to mention but didn't was there is research out there about kind of like synchronous versus asynchronous learning types of things, and we know that these synchronous learning experiences really add to the level of learning, just kind of looking out there. And I spoke with a woman who, I think she's a grad student. She did, when Geographical Sciences was doing their MPS program, she had this unique experience of teaching a live lecture, it was asynchronous, and then Adobe Connect lecture or something. It was like this weird kind of like thing, and the asynchronous, where she taught it completely asynchronous, was apparently like the worst, and the students got terrible grades. The live lecture was good, and the Adobe Connect was actually on par with the live lecture. So I think it's really a powerful program that we've really enjoyed.
And I would say that's consistent like with the evaluations, because as Julia mentioned, for this last class I did 2 pre-prepared modules, and the feedback that I got from students is that they liked the information, but what they missed was being able to stop and ask questions. And so so I think that they have come, like they do like that time where you're there and you're with them, which is what we found.
Oh, did you mean to put this twice?
Yeah, because I think it's a good thing and a bad thing. Okay. So I did put it on both slides as a challenge as well as a pro, just because sometimes you're getting information from so many different places. It's not always easy to navigate that as you're teaching. And one of the things that we found is we actually tried to turn off the text box at some point in time because no students were speaking, it was all written. And it kind of just sounded weird because I would read out the text, the chat, and then respond to it. And I mean, it was a personal preference. I didn't like it. And so when we turned it off, students got very upset. And so, so just as something to be aware of as you're setting up a class, kind of what policy you want to put in place to manage that.
I think with Adobe Connect, you have a lot more going on as the teacher. You've got the text box, you've got your polls going on, you're navigating your PowerPoint, and it's more for you to attend to, which we know makes it harder for you to attend well to any one thing. So we have a policy in my class that Students are allowed to use the text box. They know that I won't necessarily be reading it while I'm giving the lecture. And if there is something that they, they primarily use it to say, oh yes, I agree, or oh no, I don't think that's true. Or if I'll say, well, what do you think, X or Y? They'll say X, 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 or Y, Y, Y. And then I'll say, if I catch something in the text box, I'll say, tell me a little bit more about that. Then they're required to turn on their webcam and speak. Or if they have a question, they're required to turn on their webcam and speak. And that's really improved the flow of the class. And
yeah. And we adopted something similar, and I think that that's helped a lot.
So you don't have TAs or anything?
Next semester we will.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we've used with Adobe Connect is the TA monitors that chat and is able to answer a lot of the questions because you don't necessarily need an instructor. They're just like little technical questions.
Yeah.
So this is where the rubber meets the road of the reality of our budget, and we were not able to put a TA in. We realize now, like reflecting back on just creating a master's program for a department, we have lots of thoughts on that too. That's what we have this student that's taking like a Kaplan course through Adobe Connect, and they have multiple TAs who the students can chat with, and I think it's a far easier experience. And it's just a budgetary reality that for this initial year we weren't able to have a TA, but we in the future will, and I think that'll change things. So. And then I added this at the last second. You have to, anytime you're doing distance learning, you have to think about assessment, and you have to think about how you're going to assess your students. So I am a big fan of like presentations and things like that, and that's wonderful in that you can do that in Adobe Connect. There's some challenges, and you have to think, I think that this point refers kind of more broadly to distance learning. How are you going to assess your students? When you give tests and quizzes and things like that, they have open access to the internet. You can't monitor how they're doing unless you take this extra step to, have them do other types of things, and it can make things a little bit stickier. But
yeah, I've tried a variety of ways, and I think so far the presentation has actually gone the best. They've been prepared. They knew they were going to have to turn their stuff on, and were ready to do that. I've also tried multiple choice exams through Canvas, and that's been a little bit of a challenge for us. Partly there was like a Canvas issue where multiple choice was being scored incorrectly. So I think that's something separate. But it was also just really hard to design questions knowing that people were Googling. I mean, we asked them not to, but in getting feedback about the exam, when they told me what sources they relied on, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, we didn't actually talk about that in class. And so I think we're still sort of refining this piece as well. Yeah.
Do you feel like your graduates' employers might, value people who took an online course differently than people who took a regular class because of this proctoring of exams issue? Are they concerned maybe that somebody who got an online degree, like the academic dishonesty, is a greater concern?
That is a huge issue for multiple reasons, related to A, what you can do with a master's in psychology, and B, kind of how you present the program. And I think it's a multi-layered issue, even just getting down to the MPS degree versus an MA or an MS. We don't, our students don't necessarily, I've seen students' resumes and they don't necessarily say this is an online class. They say, I was awarded an MPS from the University of Maryland. So, and it's sort of at the student's discretion, and I think some of our students are a little circumspect around that. I would say, though, that the Adobe Connect makes them feel like they are attending real classes, et cetera. And with the proctoring issue, my tendency has been towards essays and things like that.
Well, and trying to evaluate them in a number of different ways to ensure that the knowledge is actually there. So like the class that I taught last semester, multiple choice, I think was really the way to do that. But this upcoming term, I think essays are going to be a better way to gauge. And I asked them for the multiple choice to like justify their answers, and that gave me a really great view into what was being understood and what was not. So I feel like to a certain extent we tried to get at exactly what you're talking about that way, where they had to actually say why their answer was correct. And it was interesting to see who had a hard time with that and who was able to produce a good answer.
And certainly at a graduate level as well, you're hoping that they are analyzing, comparing, things like that. I mean, the pure memorization, to me, feels a little bit more undergraduate. I mean, and then there are things that people have to memorize, sure. But, you know, we really kind of, and I think a lot of Aditi's like multiple choice was, which of the following are a symptom of depression according to the DSM, you know? And then it's like the essays are, you know, what is a current gap in the literature on autism treatment or whatever.
Actually, a question, I'm still not, this is a totally online class, right? Because you had said there was the blended you're having blended classes now in a different form. I'm getting confused.
So we have like there's some synchronous lectures, there's some asynchronous lectures, there's some reading, there's some group work, etc. And a lot of students do, because we actually have group work and stuff that is outside the classroom. So a lot of our students use Google Groups and stuff like that to meet out of the classroom because, as I'm not sure people know, so Adobe Connect, the room is always there, students can enter, etc. But unless the host gives them microphone rights, webcam rights, they can't turn on their own as participants. So it's not as great, and I have not figured out a way to do this. I don't believe that there is. It's not as great of like a classroom space for people like when they're doing their own group work to go into and use. So a few learning challenges. It's online learning, it's distance learning, so students sometimes feel like not quite as close with each other as they would like, and we do a lot of stuff to try and bludgeon that friendship into them, but there's sometimes only so much you can do.
And we're mentioning it because it's actually been something that showed up on our feedback recently, that they wish that they had a stronger sense of community. And I think, Deb, this is something that you mentioned during your workshop, and so we tried to incorporate a lot of those suggestions. And at times, like the discussion board has been a really great place for like more conversation like that. And then, sometimes like it just hasn't brought people in. Yeah.
The group just doesn't, the dynamic of the people might not even work face to face.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, they willingly signed up for an online program, so at a certain point you can't please everyone, right? And one other learning challenge I would say is you are at the mercy of technology, and with all distance learning, we had an issue over Christmas break where our students, there was a sys reboot and our students got kicked out, and poor Deb had to put our students back in on Christmas Day, which we were so thankful for, and just over the moon that she was able to do that, and we were so lucky, but it was less than ideal, and these things are at the mercy of the internet. So we would say best practices just
to create a lot of opportunities for people to talk and to participate, and initially to be very, very clear about what you expect from them, because even though they can like see my face, I think that there are some of those nonverbals that are lost in the process as well from my end to them. So I think initially being very, very clear about how you want them to go about interacting with one another.
Yeah. We really like our students to turn on their webcams. It makes it more personal, so we try and always model that. We encourage them to do so. Other little things that we've just like learned how to do. So my class starts out every class period with a 6-minute quiz where somebody is the reporter of the quiz, and everybody has to shout out answers. So everyone turns on their mic or is typing in, and they have 6 minutes to answer 10 questions from the readings. And things like that have been really popular. Like the students love, like you have like the reporter who's like, come on, Janie, like go look that up, or like, come do it. And they're on the internet and they're doing stuff, and it's like a group work. And so we've learned like little things like that kind of get people more motivated, get people interested. I have what's called, and I understand the students not wanting to necessarily be called on randomly, so I have an on-deck schedule. So if I throw out a question and nobody answers, the person that's on deck is going to be the person that answers. And that takes away a little bit of the social anxiety for the students, et cetera. So little things like that we've kind of been like playing around with and doing stuff with.
I let them know what kind of questions I'm going to be asking, that these are the main topic areas. So if you're going to focus your reading on something, this is something to focus on and you'll be able to participate. So they know that ahead of time.
And then we discourage the use of the text box just because it's hard for us to monitor without a TA, and it's and sometimes we think this is a master's of professional studies. Turn on your audio, be a big girl and voice your opinions and expressions. So we give not irregular lectures on participation, and that they're expected to talk, etc.
Yep.
So that is, I think, the end. And that's, certainly there are many people out here that know a whole lot more about this than we do and who have a whole lot more experience, but this has just been ours.
And I would add to that last piece, I think that we just had an interesting group of students. I think that a different mix of people would have been able to use the text box effectively. We didn't find that with our folks this year. And so I think that we'll be thinking about revisiting some of these things depending on what our cohort looks like next year.
Yeah. My first semester doing this, I required the audio, but it really took just as long to plead with them to answer a question than they could type it. So I've just gone to the chat and I will copy paste the whole thing, because I'm not really reading it, but before I close it out, I copy paste the whole chat and put it in Google Docs. There's some funny stuff that happens. They're on task, but maybe 85% of the time. But there's some comments there that are not rude at all. They're just funny, and I think that's another way to build community that you can't do face to face necessarily.
Yeah.
So.
I have a technical question about the camera. So if every student has their camera on, and you have your, what are people seeing?
We rarely do that where everybody has their camera on.
I think it would shut us.
We had this thing up there a minute ago. We tell them to turn on their mic and their camera. I was like, well, how does that work? What do people see?
So
there's 30 different people, each with their camera on.
So it's only the person talking will turn it on, so they wouldn't all have them on at the same time.
I see.
And then when they come on, our face becomes smaller, and it's like a Brady Bunch sort of thing, that as more come on, we get smaller and smaller.
You don't have to control, you don't have to be like the operator at the switchboard deciding whose face is up there.
Nope. We give them all rights at the beginning, and then they mute their mic. And then if they are going to speak or they're going to make a presentation, then they know that they have to turn on their webcam, and then they just pop up.
But if 30 people simultaneously turned their thing on, what would happen?
We have never had that problem.
Yeah. Well, we've never asked them to, because we're kind of afraid of what would happen to the room.
Yeah, we really like it when they raise their hand. That raise their hand button works great, and then they'll turn on their audio. It really feels like as close to a classroom as you can possibly get.
Yeah. I think, I think it also just has a little bit to do with our particular population, because a lot of the stuff that was coming in the text box was not polite. It was not funny. It was just very I'm unhappy with this, and so I was like, well, I'm sorry. And so that's where I started to feel like that was disruptive, and so I was like, yep, go ahead, please turn on your mic, and then you're welcome to say what you like, but you can see why people weren't as likely to say that out loud.
It is a little bit like road rage. We did have a student that was a little less cognitively advanced than the other students and would make some comments that were a little eye-rolling, and we had an occasion or two where a student would, because you don't see them, and you're far enough away that you can throw out kind of a snipey little comment or something like that. And we did, we did not expect from, our mean age is about 30. But, it's road rage, you don't see the other person, so you don't have that kind of human face-to-face interaction, and you act somewhat differently than maybe you would if you were in the classroom with
I find that reduces over the course of the semester as the community of the students starts to congeal just a little bit.
Yeah, and we talked to the students.
I think we did some work with individual students about making it clear what was appropriate to go in the text box. Some of them got it, some of them didn't. There are still some people that we're working with who are just straight out nasty, and they're not that way when they speak. I think that there's also partly like just related to our subject area that these are people that want to go on and work in hospitals. They want to work with people in a therapeutic setting, and so it's hard for us to support them saying, I'm too anxious to speak out loud, I have to do it in a text box. So there's like a learning principle at work here as well that I think if I was teaching an intro to clinical psych for an undergrad, I would feel very differently about that. So it's just partly for our purposes and the dynamic of the group.
So we have a part-time track and a full-time track, and so we have 2 or 3 students who are part-time, and Aditi gets those students. Hers is everyone progresses in the same way throughout the classes. Aditi gets all of the students, I get just the students that are full-time. So I think I have about 19 students total or something like that. And it's like 7 and 11. And I think teaching small classes, so often we think of like online, we think of like MOOCs and these like huge classes. Teaching these small classes on Adobe Connect has just been like a joy. Like the student, it's really easy to talk to them. Like,
it's also been kind of fun to put together the asynchronous lectures. Like when you think about just the information that I want them to have, I don't want to waste time talking about it, but they need to know. It's kind of been fun to do that. We use a software called Camtasia so they can hear our voice and just see it, and somebody does video editing for us. And so it's been fun to play around with those different ways to think about getting information across.